Yesterday, I almost finished the concept of growth and development. Just one thing remains. That was the discussion on strategy of development, right? So, yesterday I told you that there are two approaches or strategies, you can say. One is balanced and another is unbalanced. And the experts or economists, they are divided here. In fact, in economics, there is a branch that is called development economics. And in that, there are many models and strategies discussed by different experts. And these models and strategies are broadly divided into two parts, balanced and unbalanced. Now, they have their own arguments that I discussed yesterday. And I also told you that why we are discussing this thing in the class, because this is something related with optional. But why I discussed it? Because when India started the planning process, we faced the same question. What is the best route for us? Whether it should be balanced development or unbalanced development. Obviously, we selected the unbalanced growth strategy, and that was led by Professor P.C. Mahalanobis. And on that same strategy, the second 5-year plan was formulated, and that is why this strategy starts from second plan, not from the first plan, right? That is, so when I come to planning, and I will discuss these things. Now, once we say that it was unbalanced growth strategy, so obviously it means we selected one sector out of the three, and that was made the leading sector of the economy. So what was that sector? This is the question now. So if you have any idea about 5-year plans, you know what was the main objective of second 5-year plan. That will give you the answer. The main objective of second 5-year plan was rapid industrialization. It means which sector was given the leading role? That was industrial sector. Right? So answer is very simple. But now the question is whether the whole industrial sector or a part of it, whether all the subsectors of industries were promoted or there was further selection. Now to answer this question, first you should know what is the classification of industries. Otherwise you cannot answer this, right? So I am going to tell you the classification of industries and then come back to this question, okay? So what is the classification of industries? So there are 4 parts of it. The first is called capital goods industry, and whenever we use the term capital goods, it basically means plant and machinery, right? Because otherwise, in general, when we say capital, yesterday I used the word capital and I said capital means productive asset. But that was in the context of whole economy. So a road is also a productive asset, a canal is also a productive asset. But now I am talking about industrial sector, not agriculture and transport. So within the industrial sector, if you see how do we produce things, obviously by using plant and machinery. So if we talk about industrial sector, capital goods means plant and machinery, okay? So here when I say capital goods industry, I mean plant and machinery industry. Obviously that was important, and you know, there are many big companies today in India. It all started with public sector, and among the very few that were set up, Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, Hindustan Machine Tools, right? These were 2 big companies in public sector. Now we have dozens of such companies, and many of them are in the private sector. But all this is capital goods industry. Then the second is called intermediate intermediate goods industry. Now, intermediate means that the industry that is between the two other industries. For example, yesterday I was talking about terms of trade, and I said there is a chain, right? Like you start with mining, that is the first step. Then after mining, we produce steel. From steel, we produce other things. Now in this chain, steel will be considered as intermediate industry. Okay. Similarly, a very good example is the petroleum sector. In the petroleum sector, the first step is crude oil. Then we refine it. After refining, we get many products. They are important, petrol, diesel, and other things. Generally, in the manufacturing, whatever is the byproduct, that is considered a waste or less important. But petroleum is one sector where this waste that you call waste, or you can say byproduct, is not less important. And all the synthetic thing that you see today in the world, that comes from this waste that we call byproduct. And we have a range of industries, starting from, say, synthetic textile or paint, polish, and today pipes, furniture. In our homes, if you just observe, it is flooded with synthetic things, and everything comes from these byproducts. And that is why, you know, there is a separate group now that is called petrochemical industries that comes from this. Petrochemical industry means the industries which get the raw material from petroleum sector. These are petrochemical industries. So there is a long chain here, and all the industries which come between the two extremes, they are all intermediate goods. So intermediate industry is a important, it includes very important industries. And the third is called basic goods industry. That is the old name, basic goods industry. Today we are using more and more the word core industry. So write both. Basic goods industry, in economics books you will get the word basic goods industry. But most of the people today, they use the word core. Officially also in India, if you just read the government documents, they are using the word core. Now why these industries are called core? Because they are so important. Without them, the industrial growth or economic growth is not possible. So that is why they are core. In India, 8 industries are classified as core. You know, if you want to write the names, so it starts with natural gas, right? So what are the core industries? 8. Core natural gas, then crude oil, number 2. Number 3, refining. Refining means petroleum refining. Number 4, coal, then electricity. Now you see, out of 8, 5 are from energy sector. It gives you enough hint that without energy, no economy can survive or grow. That is why energy security is so important in your development planning. And then after this comes steel, and then cement, steel, cement, and last is chemical fertilizers. You know, knowing these very basic things, generally people ignore this, because every month, you know, there is a data published that core industries, core sector growth rate is this much. Every month the data comes, but nobody cares what is core. And I guess 3-4 years ago, there was a question on this only, and it was so simple that which of the following is not included in core industries, and 5-6 names were given. Yes? Largest weightage. Out of these, obviously the petroleum sector has the largest weightage, I don't remember all the 8, but obviously the petroleum sector has the largest weightage. But we can get it easily from Google, but that is not required, right? So basic goods industry, you understand. Now the fourth is called consumer goods industry. Consumer goods industry. Okay, can you repeat 4 and 5? 4 was coal and 5 was electricity. So what is consumer goods? You all understand. Industries which produce consumer goods are consumer goods industry. But what is more important here to know that this is further divided into 2 parts. One is called durable and another is non-durable. Durable and non-durable. You see, durable means the things that we consume over a longer period of time, like automobile, furniture, gadgets, this is all durable. And non-durable means consumables, like the food products, toiletries, and things like that. Now, interesting thing is that the durable goods, in economics book, if you read, it will be always written as durable. But otherwise, at other places, you will get one more word. For durable, we also use the word white goods. White goods. And you know why they are called white goods? It is actually a very old name. Before emergence of these synthetic material, whenever any durable good was manufactured, it was made of 2 metals. It was steel or aluminium. And as the color of both the metal was white, the experts gave this name white goods. So white good, if you read anywhere, it means they are talking about durable goods, right? Like automobile is durable good, refrigerator is durable good, right? And non-durable, non-durable today is called FMCG. Right. I've got a question. Should we consider SAIL as a capital goods industry or intermediate industry or core industry? Let me clarify this, that when I use these words, there is a lot of overlapping. So no, it is not a strict classification. For example, steel industry. So steel is intermediate as well as core. So it depends in what context we are talking. So steel will come in both, right? So don't think that if any industry is written under one head, so it cannot be included in the other, right? So because you have to go by the definition. These are just the examples. So you said SAIL. So SAIL, what SAIL produces? Obviously steel. So it cannot be capital good industry. But it is intermediate and also it is core. Okay. Now what is FMCG? Fast moving consumer goods. Fast moving consumer goods. And why these are called fast moving? Because from the production point to consumption, the process is very fast. Like if you just observe manufacturing date of say a toothpaste or a soap or a shampoo or things like that, it is hardly 1 or 2 months old, right? And when we buy it, within few days we consume it. So this whole process, that is why it is called fast moving. From the production point to ultimately being consumed, the number of days are less, so it is fast moving. And you know, the 2 biggest FMCG companies in India, one is Procter & Gamble and another is Unilever. Then we have, after these 2, we have so many companies in the middle segment, like ITC is also producing many goods. Even this Patanjali of Baba Ramdev has become big company, right? And then we have many sectoral type things like Nirma is another company, but it is in one segment only. So these are all consumer goods industry. I have a request. Can you please explain capital goods? There is no explanation required. Just remember that capital goods means the industry that produces plant and machinery. And I gave the example also, like Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, it is producing electrical equipments. Hindustan Machine Tools, very old public sector company, but mostly people remember HMT for the wristwatches. But there were two units of HMT because its full name was Hindustan Machine Tools. So Hindustan Machine Tool, it had two branches. One was manufacturing wristwatches, and very interestingly that this was known more in India than machine tools. Though basically it was a machine tool company. And then we have so many companies today. So now going back to that question that I asked, out of these four, which were selected by Mr. Mahalanobis? So the answer is not all the four, but the top three. And I have a question, cosmetics will fall under FMCG or durable? It is very simple answer. Cosmetic is a consumable, right? So obviously it is FMCG, right? So these three were selected, but it is very strange that in none of the book this has been mentioned. Even if you read NCERT, what they say, that what is Mahalanobis model, so they have just written that it was heavy industries model. And heavy industries means big plants, production on a large scale, that is heavy industries. But I tell you, suppose someday you get a question that car manufacturing, whether it was included in Mahalanobis model or not, it was promoted in Mahalanobis model or not. Now if you go by the concept of heavy industries model, so car manufacturing comes under that. Now you are confused. But if you have the clarity that consumer items were not given the priority, so you can decide no, car was not the priority area of the Mahalanobis model. That is why I am explaining all this to you. Okay? So that is the story. Now, one more thing, that Mahalanobis model officially, it was used during the second plan only. After that the models changed. But the strategy continued, though the name does not appear there, but the Mahalanobis strategy continued till 1980. And I tell you the data, then you will understand. You see, when the first plan was prepared, actually we were not prepared to start a plan. So that is why some experts say it was half plan, means half-heartedly we started without preparation. But by the end of the first plan, now we were well prepared, and the second plan is the turning point. Now when the first plan was started, leading role or the priority was given to agriculture sector. Industry was not the priority sector. And when the priority is given, what is the effect? Effect is budget allocation. When, like you know, there are hundreds of schemes, previous government, this government, even very old schemes, all you read, there is a long list of schemes, maybe in 300-400 schemes going on. But if you really want to know which all schemes are important under this government, just do one thing. See the budget document and see the budget allocation. The schemes where the budget allocation is high, that is the priority scheme for this government. Very simple formula, I tell you. Right? So, generally, the governments, they don't stop the scheme, but they just reduce the budget allocation and it is negligible. So it is on paper only. So what happened during the first 5-year plan, industrial sector was allotted only 55 crore rupees out of 1,960 crore rupees. That was the total 5-year plan outlay. Outlay, you understand? What is outlay? Outlay means allocation of fund. Like we say, a budget outlay. Budget outlay means how much money has been assigned for a particular sector. So that is called outlay. So the plan outlay was approximately 2,000 crore, but how much industry got? Just 55 crore, means less than 3%. And the second plan, when Mahalanobis model was introduced, this less than 3 becomes 18%. That is why I say it is the turning point. And then 18%, third plan it continued at 18%, fourth plan it was 21%, and fifth plan it was 23%. It means it continued to increase during this period. And that is why I say that it is wrong to say that the Mahalanobis model was just for the second plan. Officially it is not there, but the strategy of Mahalanobis continued for a longer period of time. But after 1980, now the policies started changing, and then the allocation for industry, budget allocation, started decreasing, because now that is the point from where the private sector was pushed forward. Now you take the leading role, and the government was withdrawing, and so obviously the outlay was getting reduced, right? So all this I will come to all these issues again, but I just mentioned that you should not be confused about this model, Mahalanobis model, because out of all the models, this is the only model that can be asked in any exam, right? So we should be well aware about the Mahalanobis model. I have a question that yes, there is very interesting observation by Ashish that all the products having expiry date are FMCG. Yes, we can't take it as a definition, but yes, it is interesting observation, and in 99% cases it is yes correct, right? Then is white goods are also known as luxurious goods? No. What is luxurious good? Luxurious good means the goods which only rich can afford. And I tell you that luxury itself is very relative. Now, what is luxury today may become essential tomorrow, right? Like bicycle is also white good. But can you say that bicycle is a luxury good? Now car, a small car is essential item, but SUV may be called a luxury good. So luxury is very relative word. So we can't say that, right? And then another question is, how can anyone differentiate consumer goods industry from other three industries, because capital, intermediate and basic goods are also consumed by someone? No, by someone. I did not say someone, I say by consumers. Can you consume steel directly? Can you consume coal directly? Right? So when I say consumer goods, it means what we purchase from the shops and use. That is consumer good. So just we are all consumers, so what we buy generally, that is all consumer goods. So I hope now it is clear to all of you. Now that was the first part. Now then we have to discuss one more small thing. That is salient features of Indian economy. Take it also as part of introduction. In many books, this is the first chapter. So I don't know why there is so much confusion. Is consumer goods industry a heavy industry? It may or may not be. Like I give you example. Suppose a textile mill producing textile, that is heavy industry. But the same type of cloth being manufactured by a weaver family. The product is same, but the scale is very different. So when we say heavy industry, it is about scale, not about the product. Okay? So scale is something different, and don't mix up the two things. Now, salient features of Indian economy. Now, under this, I am going to discuss few words that we use as salient features. And the first statement is that Indian economy is dependent on agriculture, or you can say agriculture sector. So Indian economy is dependent on agriculture. You see, in 1950 or just after independence, the share of agriculture in our total production that we call GDP was approximately 56%. Right? In different books, different numbers are written. Some books say approximately 60%, but don't bother about all this. But it was more than half. Obviously, it was the leading sector, and that is why we say it that at the time of independence, Indian economy was agrarian economy, thanks to the British government. Otherwise, it was a manufacturing economy. So, it was agrarian economy at the time of independence. So, that was fine. We said that Indian economy is dependent on agriculture. But what is the current status? From 56% share, now it is down to approximately 18%. So, if the share of agriculture is just 18%, so in fact, it is the smallest industrial sector, services sector, and agriculture sector. Out of the three, agriculture today is the smallest sector, right? The contribution is 18%, industry is somewhere around 26-27%, and services is approximately 54-55%. That is their level. So now it is services, then industry, then agriculture. So can we still say that Indian economy is dependent on agriculture? If somebody goes by this factor only, then obviously not. But if we consider other things also, then only we can say this. So what are those other things which make this sector so important? You know, couple of things I discussed yesterday in the context of balanced growth. So I'm going to give you 4 points in favor of agriculture sector, and that will explain this. So point number 1 here is that it provides input for important industries. It provides input for important industries. That I explained yesterday, right? Then number 2, it provides demand for important industries. There are many industries in which growth of that industry is dependent on agriculture growth. You see, if there is a bad monsoon year, that year the chemical fertilizer industry suffers. Even the tractor industry suffers, because if the farmers are not getting enough income, obviously they will not buy these things in good quantities. Even the consumer goods industry also suffers, because you know, the FMCG companies today, they are selling more than 50% in rural areas. It is not that visible to those who are living in cities only, they don't have interaction. But yes, this is the reality. if you just see the figures of automobile sector like Hero Honda, or if you just think what Procter and Gamble is doing. And you know, this is very interesting fact that there was a time 20, 30 years ago when there were many products in the market which were supposed to be consumed by rich only, like surf, shampoo, even tomato ketchup. And there was only one company manufacturing tomato ketchup during 1980s. It was Kisan. There was only one brand of detergent, that was Surf. And these were all considered as premium brands. But when there was saturation means the rich people, they were all covered. Now where to sell more? Then they realized now we have to target the middle income group and lower middle income group. So what happened after that? Now Surf and Surf Blue. One is premium brand, other is normal brand. And in every segment of the product you will find it, whether it is soap, whether it is shampoo, whether anything. You just observe now and you will get that the same company is manufacturing two things. One the premium, another the normal. Another very interesting factor, everything you see, we are copying from the West. But there is one thing that we are doing just the opposite. You see, if you go to US, in US the concept is the pack size is always bigger and bigger. More popular is 2-liter Coke or 1-liter Coke. But in India, you know what is most popular? 200 ml Coke for 7 rupees. Why? Because that depends on the purchasing power of the masses. And that is why the sachet culture dominates India today. In 20, 30 years, this is a very interesting development. Then in every product you have the sachet. 5 rupees, 7 rupees, 10 rupees, for everything there is a sachet. Earlier this was not the culture. Why? Because all these manufacturers now are targeting the lower middle and poor people, because above that there is already saturation. And there is a big fight going on in this segment, middle income group and lower middle. So this is why this is so important. Then two more points. The next point is largest employer in the economy. Largest employer. You know, out of the total employment in India, in all the sectors, agriculture provides approximately 45%. 55% comes from industry and services. So it is the largest employer. And you know, for a populous country like India, employment is such an important factor. So there is this contribution. And the last point is net earner of foreign exchange. Net earner of foreign exchange. For India, foreign exchange is equally important. So what is net earner of foreign exchange? Means importing less and exporting more. And if I give you a figure of the last year, in the agriculture sector, we imported goods worth 1.5 lakh crore and we exported goods worth 2.5 lakh crore. So 1 lakh crore worth of foreign exchange this sector earned, and that is the achievement of this sector. So whenever you have to write any answer in favor of agriculture sector, these are the points that we can use. Otherwise, it is the smallest sector out of the three. So from the point of view of share in GDP or contribution in GDP, it cannot be considered as the best, right? So that was point number one. Point number two, that Indian economy is a mixed economy. Dehradun is saying that it was agriculture sector only which show positive side in the economy even during COVID times. Yes, you are very correct. The agriculture sector growth rate this year is expected to be 3.5% positive. So that supported the economy, no doubt. But this is exceptional. So what is mixed economy and why we use this word? Mixed economy word is used because generally in the world, when we talk about economies, they are classified as capitalistic economy or socialistic economy. These are the two categories only. Now, when we say capitalistic economy means dominated by private sector. Socialistic economy means dominated by the public sector, because this is the classification. Now, we face this question at the time of the planning, that what should be our approach. So we decided to take the middle path, and we said no, it cannot be absolutely capitalism or absolutely socialism. So at least on paper, we were mixed economy. And whenever we use the term mixed economy for Indian economy, it simply means coexistence of private sector and public sector. The meaning is very simple. Coexistence of private sector and public sector. Actually, it is very difficult to say, because she is asking a question that which economy is absolutely capitalist. Actually, it may be relatively more or relatively less, because there is nothing absolute. But actually, this whole concept of absolute capitalism is not possible. But yes, to a larger extent, they are capitalist, like US economy. The things that we believe in India, that defense should be in public sector, rail should be in public sector, and we say oil should be in public sector. But you just see what is the status of the US economy. The things which we consider in India as strategic, even that is in private sector in US. So if you compare and then you say that, okay, they are more capitalistic. But yes, there will be some point where some government control will be there, right? But yes, the dominance of private sector in capitalist economies is much higher than what we see in India, right? So in that sense, it is a mixed economy. So Indian economy, so one thing is that we can say coexistence of private sector and public sector. And we can also say coexistence of capitalism and socialism. Both are correct. But you know, from where we get these things, the very first year after independence, the first industrial policy was announced. That was 15th April 1948. And in that policy, this issue was discussed. And in that policy, the government made this statement that there will be coexistence of private sector and public sector, and that was interpreted as mixed economy. So that is why, if you go by the original words used by the government, so it is coexistence of private sector and public sector, but the derived meaning of that is coexistence of capitalism and socialism, right? So that is, then the third point is that Indian economy is dual economy. You know what is dual? Dual means two. Actually, the word dual is used very much in philosophy. I guess nobody in the class is from that background. But you know, I come from a place which is known for this philosophy. Even the teachers which are today in Delhi teaching philosophy as optional, they are all directly or indirectly linked to Allahabad. Because this is, Allahabad is the hub of this optional. So, I never studied philosophy, but as there was long contact with these philosophers, so I know few things about it. But dualism is such a word that actually used to differentiate between Indian philosophers and Western philosophers. In the Western philosophy, it is believed that God and soul, they are two different entities. That is Western philosophy. But Indian philosophy is that they are one and the same. So the Western philosophy is dualistic and Indian philosophy is non-dualistic. These are the terms used. But we are using the same term that is very popular in philosophy in economics now. So again, the meaning remains the same. Dualistic means existence of two. But what are these two things? These two things are traditional and modern. Coexistence of traditional and modern. Right? Now, you have to understand this whole thing. You see, dualism is actually a characteristic of every developing economy. It is not only India, every developing economy. Because when the economy is underdeveloped, it is largely using traditional modes of or primitive modes of production. When it is developed economy, it is largely using modern modes of production. The techniques are most modern. But when the economy starts developing, so this is a journey from underdevelopment to development. Now, during this journey, this dualism appears because this replacement happens over a very long period of time. For example, at the time of independence, there were hardly any big industries in India. But after that, the industrialization started. Even in agriculture, green revolution started in 60s. Services sector started growing 3-4 decades ago. So what happened in this development process? Now we started using more and more modern technologies, and these modern technologies replaced the old technologies. But where are we today? If you observe any sector of the economy, agriculture, we are still using primitive methods in many areas, but then we are using most modern methods like tractors, harvesters. If you go to the industrial sector, we have the best technology being used in many industries, but then we have small and cottage industry also. If you go to the services sector, we have bullock carts and also we are planning bullet train. We have already metro, right? We are still using the post office services for sending the letters, but we have internet and email also. So this is called dualism. But yes, it is also correct that this dualism will disappear once we become a developed economy, because this replacement continues, and once the whole thing is replaced, most part of the economy is modern, and then it is only modern, so this dualism will disappear, right? So dualism is a feature of every developing economy. Then we have a very interesting thing, and also very important, that in the context of Indian economy, we are always confused about these two words, underdeveloped versus developing. And sometimes I have seen that people, they hesitate in using the word underdeveloped. Now, why this hesitation? Because if you are not understanding the word properly. You see, if I just draw a small line here, can we say that it is long or small? No, no comparison. But if we have another line here, so this is short, as compared to another line. So same is the concept of the word underdevelopment. So when you say underdeveloped, it means you are comparing, because there is no such line defined by any institution in the world that if you cross this line you are not underdeveloped. It is a relative word. So when we compare Indian economy on different development parameters, like we compare, say, US and Indian economy. So what are generally the development parameters? I discussed earlier: per capita income, right? Infrastructure, poverty ratio, unemployment rate, IMR, MMR, literacy rate, life expectancy, whatever. Can we say we are at par with US? So if we are not at par with, we are behind them on various development parameters. So there is no problem if somebody says that India is underdeveloped. So underdeveloped as compared to US, no problem. But we are more comfortable with the word developing. In fact, both the words are correct, because developing is something different. How can you say that Indian economy is developing? Obviously, again, a comparison is involved. But now the comparison is not between India and US. The comparison is between India in 1950 and India in 2020. What was India in 1950 and what we are today? If you compare on any parameter, we are far more developed. It means we are moving forward. So India is underdeveloped, India is also developing, right? But now we have got a better word than these two. And you know what is that? India is an emerging economy. So now that is more respectful. So nobody today will say that India is developing economy. Everybody is writing that India is an emerging economy. You know what is the meaning of this word, emerging economy? Emerging means emergence. From the emergence, this word comes. So emergence in what? In what sense? You see, I tell you one thing, that when you see the status of any country in the world, there are certain parameters on which it is measured. Any economy, any country is more important or less important for the world depending on their share in global GDP and their share in global trade. These are most important economic parameters. Share in global GDP and share in global trade. You see, 20, 30 years ago, what was our status? We were negligible. Our share, our contribution was negligible. So we were not important to the world. But then what happened during the past 20, 30 years? Not only India, about more than 20 countries, India, China, the largest among those, they started growing at a fast rate. Our growth rate suddenly increased. And with increased growth rate, obviously our share in global GDP increased, our share in global trade increased, and that is why now these 20, 30 countries, they jointly contribute a good part of the global GDP. And that is why we are important for the world. And that is why, there was another, earlier there was an important organization that was called G7. There was a time when G7 countries, they were dominating in everything, and they were not listening to anybody else. They were deciding everything in the world. And in 1999, G20 was set up. What is G20? G20 is a group of 19 countries plus European Union. So these are 45 odd countries. Not 1999 to 2008, nobody cared about G20. Even there were no regular meetings of G20. But then the global crisis started in 2008. And it was for the first time that now the developed countries were in crisis. And they were expecting the emerging economies to save them, to revive the global economy. So now they did not call the meeting of G7 for this, they called the meeting of G20. And from that point, 2008-9, in 9 there was London summit, that was very important meeting of G20. From that point, 2009, now every important decision of the world is being taken at G20 platform. Because now developed world, they have realized that without the support of the emerging economies, even if they take the decisions, they cannot do anything. This is the emergence. Right? So in geopolitics, this is the meaning, whatever I explained. But in economics, we have to limit ourselves. So then we will say what is the emergence. Emergence means increased share in global GDP and increased share in global trade. And how this happened? Through faster growth rate. Through faster growth rate. So at some places, even you will get what is emerging economy. So they may write fast growing economies are known as emerging economies. No problem, even this is correct. Because through the fast growth only you can emerge. Right. There is a question, Bharat Bhushan, third world country. Yes, we were known as third world country, but that term is no more valid. Right. And another question is, underdeveloped has a negative connotation. Yes, that is why we don't like it, but technically it is correct. That is why I gave you all the three words. Underdeveloped, then developing, better than this. And now we are not using even developing. We are always saying that India is an emerging economy. So obviously, out of the three, the best word that can be used for India is emerging economy. But in fact, all the words are applicable. Okay? So we have to take a stand as per the requirement. Right? Now, before I end this thing, in this context, I should tell you a couple of words which we will be using, because I am talking about these things, developed, developing, emerging. So there are 2-3 words. So one word is structure of the economy. What is the structure of the economy? One question is that how the increasing share in global GDP of India impact the world, positively or negatively. Now for India it is positive because now the world will listen more, whatever we say. And negative because now we will have to behave with responsibility. Because the big countries, big economies, they should be more responsible. So both sides are correct. It is positive as well as negative. Now, structure of the economy means we are talking about the contribution of different sectors in GDP. So structure of the economy means contribution of different sectors. Contribution of different sectors in the economy. You see, just when we think about a structure, what is the structure of Indian economy, what is the structure of a developed economy? So we just observe this thing: agriculture, industry and services. So if it is a developed economy, it is believed that the share will be like this: 2 to 10%, 25 to 30%, 60 to 70%. And these are all indicative, means you cannot strictly say that this should be exactly this much, because it depends on the size of the economy, size of the agriculture sector. But this is indicative. But if you compare it with India, it is roughly 18%, 27% and 55%. So where are we now? As far as the ranking is concerned, it is very similar to developed economies: agriculture, industry and services, right? But you know where is the weakness? This is our weakness. Over dependence on agriculture is a sign of underdevelopment. And there is lot of change that happened over 70-year period. From 56%, it has come down to 18%. But I tell you, this will go down further. And this process that we see is called structural change in the economy. So another word for you is structural change. Structural change. So structural change means decreasing share of agriculture in GDP. Decreasing share of agriculture in GDP and increasing share of industry and services and increasing share of Gorakhpur is asking, it is next point in salient features or it is a new term? No, I am just giving you some more words to explain whatever I discussed. Like I said, agriculture sector and its role. So now in that context, we should know these words. So it is not a salient feature, but this is additional information I am providing to you. So you understand? So structure of the economy initially is that agriculture is the dominant sector. When the economy develops, so this is one of the features of development, when the economy develops, now there is a structural change in the economy. And a structural change means now that industry and services will gain in share and the agriculture will lose in share. But it does not mean that agriculture has a negative growth. Many people misinterpret it. Agriculture will also grow, but industry and services will grow much faster as compared to agriculture. So they will be gaining in share. It is a matter of simple mathematics. Why this happens? Because you know, agriculture has a major restriction. What is that? Land. You cannot increase the agricultural land in the country. So the growth of agriculture depends on productivity only, and that happens in a gradual manner. For example, during the past 15-20 years, agriculture sector growth rate was approximately between this range, 2.5% to 3%. And every time we target 4%, but we miss that. Right? Agriculture sector growth, 4% is the target for many years. 10th plan, 11th plan, 12th plan, even after that. But obviously, you see, when it is a practice in India, whenever we fix the target, it is always on the higher side. But even I say that 3% is a good achievement in agriculture. But industry, there is no such restriction. There is one steel plant, you manufacture, you establish another plant, and your capacity doubles, 100% growth. Services also, increasing the growth rate is easier. So that is why with time the share of industry and services increase and that of agriculture decreases, and this is a structural change, right. A similar word related with this is occupational structure. So increasing share of industry and services and decreasing share of agriculture, this is about GDP. But I say occupational structure here means now I am talking about the contribution of different shares in employment. Occupational structure means contribution of different sectors in employment. So obviously, when there is a structural change in the economy, there is also change in occupational structure. Now, the ideal thing about it is that when the share of agriculture comes down in GDP, in employment also its share should come down proportionately. That is ideal. But what is the problem with our system? The occupational structure is not changing at the rate there is a structural change in the economy. Why? Because agriculture has a share of 18% in GDP and 45% in employment. It means what? Huge dependence on agriculture for employment, and this is the biggest issue that needs to be addressed if we really want to eradicate poverty in rural areas. It is simple to understand that if on a small holding, more and more people are dependent, per capita income will be low, so they are poor. If you just remove half of this and employ them in industrial and services sector, without any increase in production, their per capita income will double. So the biggest problem is over dependence on agriculture for employment. And I will take up this issue when I discuss employment and unemployment in poverty, etc. So there I will discuss this in much detail. Here I have just indicated that this is the problem, and that is why our occupational structure is very underdeveloped, right? Our occupational structure is very underdeveloped. I have a question, is it 45% or 55%? I guess you have messed up everything. 55% I said it is share of services in GDP, and 45% I am saying share of agriculture in employment. And this also includes farm laborers, because agriculture means the whole sector. Everybody that is directly or indirectly getting employment in agriculture, that is all included, right? So you understand this thing? Because these are the words, they will be used by many people if you read articles, and whenever there are issues of a structural change, the pace of growth of the economy, its effect on the economy, its effect on employment. So these words will be used. That is why I mentioned these words. So that was the second part of discussion today, salient features of Indian economy. I have a question that what are quaternary sector? Quaternary sector is not a separate sector. All the data that is available officially is divided into three sectors only, but there are many people who are involved in petty activities, so that is called quaternary sector, but officially there is no such data available, right? Like Yes, informal, right? You see, like, I'll tell you later on this thing, but as you ask this question, informal sector, a larger part of informal sector, we may be missing out when we count them. Because if somebody is doing some petty activity in rural area and our workers are not reaching up to them, CSO doesn't know what these people are earning and or what they are doing, right? So this is the biggest problem in national income accounting also. So I'll take up this thing in national income accounting. So there is no such data available. Now, I'm going to start the first topic, that is national income accounting, right? So I have a question from Dehradun: can gig economy be regarded as quaternary sector for the namesake? No, why we will do all this exercise, right? I tell you that don't try to overdo, right? If I have already mentioned that officially there are 3 sectors of the economy only, so after that just drop the topic there, right? Because you will not get this data. That may be useful for discussions and debates, but officially there is no data available. And we have a question from Tanvi: does agro-based industry come in agriculture employment? You see, these things actually I will tell when I classify the economy, but as she has asked this question, you see, manufacturing, what is manufacturing? And in which part of the economy it is included? Because agro-based industry, when you yourself using the word industry, agro-based industry, it means it is not part of the agriculture, it is part of industry. And otherwise also, manufacturing is an industrial activity. And what is manufacturing? Converting something into another form. This is half the definition, so that there is value addition. If you burn a piece of wood, it changes into ashes, can you say it is manufacturing? The form has changed. But always add the second part, the conversion in the form, so that there is value addition. Because value addition is manufacturing. Okay? So don't miss this point. So I'll classify the economy when I discuss this new topic that I'm going to start. Just a minute. Many people are asking questions which are not related. Like I am getting, can RCEP can save Indian economy in future? Why will I comment on that? You know, I'm going to discuss the national income accounting. So I should focus on that. You should also focus on that, because RCEP is the issue of external sector. So when I come to external sector, I will take all the questions. So please, this is my request, don't do that. Ask only the questions which are related with the current topic. So it will be good for both of us. Now, national income accounting when we study this topic, the very first issue is to understand the whole thing conceptually, because facts are very simple. Whenever we talk about national income, so what is the concept of national income? It is very similar to the concept of family income. So if I ask you this question to you, what is family income, you all understand. The total income of the family is family income. Now, if you apply this, what is national income? Total income of the country is national income. So, conceptually, total income is national income. But obviously, it is too simplified. And whenever we calculate the national income, there are 4 approaches or methods to do that. And these 4 words that we use in national income accounting are GDP, GNP, NDP, or NNP. Ambarish, you are asking that I am a beginner, which book to refer for national income accounting. You better focus on today's class, because if you try to read national income accounting from any other source, you will be confused. Whatever is the requirement for this exam, I am going to explain all that, right? And all type of questions that are expected will be covered in the class itself. So after this class, there is no need to read this topic from anywhere, okay? Because there is the topic in macroeconomic class 12, but the approach is very different. You know, I explain what is the difference in approach. In UPSC, they ask the question in prelims only. This is not a mains topic, this is a prelims topic, national income accounting, number 1. And they ask the basic concepts of national income, and that is what I am going to discuss. But if you read the same topic from macroeconomics, that is the NCERT book, you know, in CBSE board, class 12, in the board exam, there is a compulsory question, and that is a numerical. So that chapter in NCERT addresses the requirement of the students of class 12, and you will get nothing in that book. And if you try to read, you are only diverted towards something that is not required at all, because you are not supposed to solve sums in UPSC, right? So approach is entirely different. That is why I am suggesting that don't read that chapter from any book. Now, GDP, GNP, NDP, and NNP. So we will start from the first word, that is GDP. So what is GDP? First, I will give you the definition, and then we will discuss the definition so that you understand the word. So first, write the definition. So it is the sum, S-U-M, sum of the monetary value. It is the sum of the monetary value of all final goods and services. It is the sum of the monetary value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a year. Now, this is the standard definition of GDP. Now, in this definition, there are 4 important things. Number 1, if I start from the end, in a year. So obviously, the GDP figure is annual, right? And here annual means a financial year. But what is important to remember, that this financial year is different in different countries. Indian financial year, we know that is enough for us. But many of the world organizations, they use calendar year as the year. And that is why when you read the data, one data is from our own organizations. They are using the year 1st April to 31st March. Then we have IMF data, we have World Bank data. They are using calendar year. So that is why there is always some difference in data. So don't worry about that. That difference is because of the difference in the period. Because if World Bank is saying something about our economy, It is based on our own estimates, that they are making certain judgments. They are not coming to India and just estimating national income in India. Whatever data our agencies collect, they just use that data and then they give their these values, right? So that is one thing in a year. Then another is sum of the monetary value. What is the meaning of this? You see, in national income accounting, one thing is very important, that the word production is equal to income. That is why at some places in many countries they call it GNI in place of GNP. So gross national income or gross national product, they are one and the same. And the reason behind this is that just imagine about a company. Whatever they manufacture is the production, but when that is sold, that is converted into income. So value of production becomes income, right? And obviously we are producing so many things, and all these have different units. We are producing food grain, we mention it in million tons, then crude oil in barrels, textile in meters, cotton in bales, and we want the total of all this. So obviously you cannot directly add all this. So what is the easiest thing to do? Convert everything in money. Multiply by the price and convert that into monetary value. So that is why the definition starts with this. It is the sum of the monetary value, and it simply means that the national income is presented in the as a monetary value, and obviously in the currency of the respective country. So these two concepts are simple. Now next is all final goods and services. Third, all final goods and services. You see, here a clarification is important, because generally when we say final good, how do we interpret the word final good? Final good means if there is a chain in manufacturing, the last item is the final good. So in any other context, this is correct. But in the context of national income accounting, we should be careful about this, that final good refers to final stage, every stage. For example, if suppose we start with mining, then it goes to steel production, that it goes to say car manufacturing. So final good does not mean car. Every stage is a final good. So when the mining process is complete, we will include that. When it is converted into steel, we will include that also. Maybe the car manufacturing is not this year, so it will be included next year. So we will not wait till this whole thing reaches this point. This is not the meaning of all final goods and services. Actually, this definition is going on for so long, and this word final is very confusing here, right? And there is a lot of problem because of the word final good. So that is why we need to explain this in every class, that don't misinterpret it. Final does not mean last stage here. Final here means every stage is a final good. But yes, one thing we have to do. If suppose the value of iron ore is 100, and when you convert that into steel, it becomes 200. When you convert that into car, it becomes 1000. So when you are calculating this part, we include the whole value 100. But when we calculate the steel, it will not be 200. Otherwise, there will be double counting, because you have already counted mining. So it will be the difference of the two, that is 100. Similarly, as steel is already counted, when you count car, then it will be written as 1000 minus 200 is equal to 800, and that is what we call value addition. So when we do that practically, Don't worry, there is no double triple counting. It is always based on value addition method. Okay. Now, these are the three things, but the most important concept is the fourth one. Obviously, it was the leading sector and part of the agriculture. It is part of India. You understand this thing? 20 years, agriculture sector is equal to income. That is why at some places in many countries they call it GNI in place of GNP. So gross national income or gross national product, they are one and the same. And the reason behind this is that just imagine about a company. Whatever they manufacture is the production, but when that is sold, that is converted into income. So value of production becomes income, right? And obviously we are producing so many things and all these have different units. We are producing food grain, we mention it in million tons, then crude oil in barrels, textile in meters, cotton in bales, and we want the total of all this. So obviously you cannot directly add all this. So what is the easiest thing to do? Convert everything in money. Multiply by the price and convert that into monetary value. So that is why the definition starts with this. It is the sum of the monetary value, and it simply means that the national income is presented in the as a monetary value and obviously in the currency of the respective country. So these two concepts are simple. Now next is all final goods and services. Third, all final goods and services. You see here a clarification is important, because generally when we say final good, how do we interpret the word final good? Final good means if there is a chain in manufacturing, the last item is the final good. So in any other context, this is correct. But in the context of national income accounting, we should be careful about this, that final good refers to final stage, average stage. For example, if suppose we start with mining, then it goes to steel production, that it goes to say car manufacturing. So final good does not mean car. Every stage is a final good. So when the mining process is complete, we will include that. When it is converted into steel, we will include that also. Maybe the car manufacturing is not this year, so it will be included next year. So we will not wait till this whole thing reaches this point. This is not the meaning of all final goods and services. Actually, this definition is going on for so long, and this word final is very confusing here, right? And there is a lot of problem because of the word final good. So that is why we need to explain this in every class, that don't misinterpret it. Final does not mean last stage here. Final here means every stage is a final good. But yes, one thing we have to do. If suppose the value of iron ore is 100, and when you convert that into steel, it becomes 200. When you convert that into car, it becomes 1000. So when you are calculating this part, we include the whole value 100. But when we calculate the steel, it will not be 200. Otherwise, there will be double counting, because you have already counted mining. So it will be the difference of the two, that is 100. Similarly, as steel is already counted, when you count car, then it will be written as 1000 minus 200 is equal to 800, and that is what we call value addition. So when we do that practically, Don't worry, there is no double triple counting. It is always based on value addition method. Okay. Now, these are the three things, but the most important concept is the fourth one. I ask a question to all of you that I said that the total production is called national income or GDP. Now, my question is that in India, suppose we are calculating India's GDP, and you know that in India, Indians are producing, but foreigners are also producing. So, in India's GDP, whether the foreign companies' contribution will be added or not, right? This is a very important question for your exam, and they are asking questions around these concepts only, right? So, now the answer for this question you will get from the part of the statement which says in an economy. The sum of the monetary value of all final goods and services produced in a country. It means what is the basis of GDP? Not the citizens of a country, what it says in a country. It means GDP of India means the production in India. It is not important who is the producer. It may be Indian or it may be a foreigner. So, gross domestic product, and always remember, everywhere this will apply, that whenever we use the term domestic, domestic refers to Indian territory. Wherever we use the term, right? Like we said, domestic saving, domestic investment, right? Domestic means within the economy, within our area, right? So, whoever is the producer, it is not important. Where is the production, that is important. So, any production on our land, in our territory is part of our GDP. But now, there are some clarifications required. You see, when we say our territory, so land is our territory, there is no doubt about that. But what about the seas? Where does our territory end? Seashore, one option. You are saying 12 nautical miles, exclusive economic zone. Many people believe that this is exclusive economic zone. But I have a question for you, just to clarify this thing. Bombay High, think about Bombay High. Right. Where is Bombay High located? Is it within EEZ? 12 nautical miles? No. Another concept. You know, I know that when Manish Gautam talks about internal security, he is talking about these things. Hot pursuit zone or EEZ, etc. He will be talking. But I don't want to go into those technicalities. The simple answer for this is that in the sea also, up to the point India is allowed to exploit for economic resources is our territory. Sometimes it is well accepted, sometimes it is disputed also, like South China Sea, what is happening? So, now if you just stick to the definition 200 nautical miles, so the countries are so close that 200 nautical mile means their territory will enter into another country. So, this 200 nautical mile will not always be correct. Even the 12 nautical mile may not always be correct. That is the problem between China and other countries. China says, no, my territory is up to Vietnam. And then Vietnam is saying, then where is my territory? Right? So, sometimes it is disputed also. So, my simple answer is that according to accepted norms, up to the extent we are allowed to exploit for economic resources, that is our territory. So, Bombay High, production in Bombay High will be part of India's GDP. That is very important for us. Similarly, the gas, Krishna Godavari basin, right? That is also part of India's GDP, right? So territory means all this. One. Number two, how do we treat embassies? Now, within the four walls, that is other country. That is why if our forces enter into that gate by force, it will be treated as attack on that country because we entered into other country's territory. Right? So whatever happens within that four wall, we have nothing to do with that. That income belongs to that country. So in the same manner, Indian embassies in other countries, they are part of India, right? This is very extreme. I don't think that this is a very possible question, but in very, very extreme case, somebody can ask this. But you should know, how do we treat embassies? Then we have another question. What about the things which are moving, like airlines coming and going, shipping companies? So there the rule is simple, that Indian companies are part of India's GDP, like Indian Air India, whether it is in Britain or US or in India, whatever their revenue, that will be part of India's GDP. British Airways comes to India, whatever their revenue, that will go to Britain. Right? So we call it the airlines carrying Indian flag, or the ships carrying Indian flag. So the ships or airlines, shipping companies which are registered in India, they are part of India's GDP, and they carry a flag, you all know that. So flag is printed on these aircrafts, so that is called. So these are the simple exceptions. Otherwise, in general, you have to just remember that anything that is produced on our land is our GDP. And I have an interesting question from somebody. So scroll karo jara isko. That the MNCs coming and producing in India, it was something like that. MNCs coming in India and producing, will it increase India's GDP? Obviously, yes. Right? Okay. Thank you. So, like we are inviting FDI, right? They are coming and setting up their plants here. Will that increase India's GDP? That may be an interesting question. So answer is simple. Once you know that anything produced on our land is our GDP, so anybody producing here, so whether it is our producer or the foreign producer, it is increasing our GDP, right? Because this is always a current topic, FDI coming more and more, and the government is also highlighting this fact, so anybody can create this type of question. So GDP, I hope you understand, and there should not be any doubt about it. Now once you are, now I have got a related question, that Flipkart, registered in Singapore but having operations in India, shall be deemed as an Indian company. No, because any company, whether it is Indian or not, will depend on registration only.